Hello everyone, Brad here again. Today I wanted to go over just the very basic tools and of how to turn a wooden bowl. I've just been wood turning about 3.5 years, so all this is fairly fresh in my mind, and a video like this would have really helped me because I think a lot of people that do videos, they kind of skip over the very basics because they've been doing it for so long, you just don't remember them. And there was just a lot of questions that I had that were just simple questions, but it was kind of hard to find an answer because everybody's kind of past that step in the video. So hopefully this will fill in the blanks for you guys that are just starting wood turning and help you out, which is something I wish I'd had. To begin with, of course, you got to have a lathe. I have behind me a Powermatic 3520A model, which is one of the older ones. And you don't need a lathe this big. I started out on a Rikon MIDI lathe, which I still have, and that's perfectly fine. I just got this lathe because I was getting into bigger bowls and wanted to turn larger bowls. Okay, first off, there's two kinds of turning that you can do. You can do just dry turning, where you've maybe purchased a dry bowl blank where it's already been kiln dried maybe, or air dried, and it's ready to turn, and you can go ahead and put your final finish on. And then also you can actually turn from a log and turn completely green wood. And at the end of the video, I'm going to go over green wood, but now let's just assume for the time being that we have dry wood. So first off, you want to be able to hold the workpiece. So, here's just a small blank for an example. And when you buy a lathe, they're all usually going to come with a faceplate. And what you can do is you can actually take the faceplate, screw it into the wood, and then you would screw it onto your spindle. And here's a clip of a previous video that I did showing a faceplate being used. The lathes will also usually come with a stub center, which I have here. And on a bowl this small, you may could get away, you can drive this into the center, and probably hold it pretty good. I really don't recommend this method for bowls. It's just really kind of hard to get it to completely grip it, and you might have a little bit of slippage. But and this is debatable, and there's a lot of videos about not using a chuck, but I mean my suggestion is to use a chuck. It just makes things so much easier. I turned my first couple of bowls without a chuck, and it works, and you can do it. It's just difficult. But the chucks, I have two chucks, and this is the one I started out with. This was the Nova chuck. Worked just fine, just doesn't have a larger capacity. This is a one-way stronghold chuck, and these things are just about bulletproof. And they usually always come with a number 2 jaw. You can buy them just body, but the number 2 jaws will handle about 80% of your bowls, and you really only need to go to the number 3 jaws if you're getting into bowls like over 14 inches. Usually when you have a chuck, they'll give you a worm, is what it's called, and this will go inside the chuck, and you can just close the chuck in on top of this worm, and you can then simply drill a hole into your bowl blank, and you can screw into this, and then it will bank up against your chuck this way, and that will hold your bowl in place. Okay, so now to illustrate, I'm just taking the worm screw, put it in my chuck, tightening up the chuck. Then you'll just take your blank where we've drilled the hole, and we'll just run it in there. And we want to bring this in there until we get all the way to the face of the chuck jaws where it's resting against the chuck jaws. So there. And on a bowl that size, that's plenty strong. That's going to really hold that bowl completely. So that's really the two methods that I use. I either use, for a bowl like this is what I would use. I would use the worm, and then as I get into bigger bowls, that's when I go to a faceplate, because you can secure that in there, and no, it's not going to go anywhere with this. But you got to have a bowl with a fair amount of depth, because you will be putting screw holes in there. And then on larger bowls, you'll also, starting out, a lot of times I'll put it on a center just until I get it smoothed out to where it's fairly in balance and round. And most lathes will come with a revolving center. As you can see, the revolving center allows it to turn. Okay, we finally went through work holding, so we're finally to the fun part, which is cutting tools. So what cutting tools do you need to make a bowl? Well, I started out with this carbide set that comes from Storby, and it has interchangeable heads, and have a square head and a round head. And with this tool, I made probably 3 bowls starting out, and it does pretty good. And there's a lot of good carbide tools out there that probably much better than this. And you can no doubt make some bowls with those, probably make some really good bowls. To me, in my opinion, it's just not as fun as the bowl gouge. Now the one thing is with this, I still use this on every bowl, because with this square tip is great for making your tenon, because I am really a big believer of making a good square tenon, and that will really make your bowls hold into the chuck much better when you turn it around to do the inside. And I'll do a little demonstration of that. Okay, as you can see here, our little sample blank, I've went ahead and turned the outside and made a tenon. And this is what I'm talking about, where the square carbide tool is so handy, because I want to make this tenon just as square and perfectly straight as I can. So with this carbide tool, you can go in here and you can cut on this edge and cut on this edge, and you can get a really 90-degree corner. Just a little bit more emphasis on this square tenon. As you can see, I've just got a chuck jaw taken off the chuck, and what you want is this corner to be as square as possible, and you want it to bank out. You want to have a flat in this area here where I'm pointing at, so that it banks out on the front of that jaw. And that'll keep your bowl really straight and keep it true when you turn it around to do the inside. And if you notice here, you want to make the tenon short enough that it doesn't bottom out in the bottom of the chuck. You want it to bank out on the face of the jaw. Okay, one quick note before I move away from tenons. The other option here is to use a recessed dovetail mount for your chuck. And with that, instead of having an extended tenon, you actually create a recess with a little bit of an angle. And so then the chuck jaws fit inside that recess, and you actually expand out on your chuck jaws to hold the bowl. And that works fine. There's a lot of people that do that. It's just been my experience, for me, that the tenon just works much better. So it's really just a preference. Okay, next up is my personal favorite, the bowl gouge. The bowl gouge is just so versatile. You can use this thing on the outside and the inside. You can scrape with it, you can shear scrape with it. Just a lot it can do. And just one note about this, these go by kind of 2 different standards. The typical American standard is to go by the diameter of the shank, and this was a 1/2 inch because that's the diameter of the shank. But the English nomenclature goes by the width of the flute, so this would be a 3/8 in the English nomenclature. But anyway, just a little note on that. But if I was going to pick one gouge, from small to medium bowls, it would be this 1/2 inch style. And of course, as you get to bigger bowls, you can get bigger gouges. I've got a 5/8 and even a 3/4 inch gouge for the very big ones. But a lot of the purists, this is all they use, is the bowl gouge. And when you're really good, you can really get a smooth bowl. And so I'm not there yet. So the next tool that I'll show you is the scraper. This is a fairly large one, and I like the scraper because it will really take out all the tool marks left over from the bowl gouge, the ridges that you have. And as you get better, you try to do your best with the bowl gouge. That's really your goal, is to get all those ridges out with the bowl gouge. But the scraper really helps you out to get that final touch. And to be honest with you, it's just a fun tool. Very easy to sharpen these, and it's just great to use. And for me, I think these 3 tools are the essential tools you need to make bowls. And I'm sure there's a lot of debate about that, but it's just what works for me. And I encourage you to look at other people's videos and get other ideas and see what you think works best for you. Okay, now we've got the outside turn, we've got our tenon made. Now it's time to turn this thing around so that we can hollow out the inside. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and simply unscrew our bowl off of our worm screw. Okay, we'll remove our worm screw now. Okay, so now we've got our tenon, and we're just going to place this into our chuck. And you see I'm banking out on that recess so that it's banked out against the jaws. And you notice I got a gap in here. You want that gap. You don't want to bank out down here. You want to bank out against the front of the jaws. So we'll tighten that up. And I usually tighten it up both places. So now you just double check, rotate, make sure you're good all the way around. So that's all there is to mounting this into the chuck to hollow out the inside. Now we've got this thing mounted up and we're ready to hollow out the inside at this point. And I'm not going to go through that. That'd be a subject for another video. So let's just imagine we've already hollowed out the inside of this bowl and we're ready to take it out and finish it up. So let's just pop this out of the chuck. So our last obstacle is to turn off this tenon. So since we haven't hollowed this out, let's just take another bowl here that I have. And imagine this is actually a finished bowl and it's been sanded and smooth. And we want to put this in here and jam chuck it is the term. And there's other options besides a jam chuck. You have like a Longworth chuck and also a vacuum chuck, and there's a few others. But with the jam chuck, this is what I have. It's just I've taken a piece of wood here. I've turned a tenon on there, and I mounted it in here and turned it so it runs true with the chuck. And then I've taken a piece of sanding mat and just glued on there. And another option is like I've heard people talk about using an old wetsuit, which is probably neoprene, and that probably actually even work better than this. But you chuck this up in here. Again, bank it out against the face of your jaws. Okay, then we're going to take our bowl and we're going to jam it in there. And one thing I didn't mention before is before you turn that around to do the inside, always go back and make sure you put you in a dimple with your tailstock to mark the center of your bowl. And that's where it comes in handy on this part. So we're going to take this bowl, put it against the jam chuck, and then we're going to bring up our tailstock. And so with that recess you've left in there, that gives you a perfect place to get right back here on the center. So we're going to lock our tailstock down. We're going to bring it in tight enough that you don't put any indentations in the inside, and enough to give you enough friction so that it won't spin on you while you're turning this tenon off. So our last step here will be turning off the tenon. So since we always have to leave the tailstock in there because it's a jam chuck, we'll just have to turn the tenon with our bowl gouge or even with our carbide tool. We can turn that tenon just as far back as we can, just to a little nub where it'll still hold jammed into between the tailstock and the jam chuck. And then once you get that turned off, then you can just simply take just a little saw and just cut that nub off and then just sand it and get it back smooth. And that's your least expensive option as far as extra equipment for your lathe. So that's the basics of turning a bowl from a dry blank. One part that I didn't mention is the sanding process. And I have a complete video on that I'll put a link at the end to this and in the description. So please watch that to get a good view of the sanding process. So now we'll show the basics of what you need to know turning a green bowl. Okay, now we're going to talk about making a green bowl out of a log. And of course I've got a log here, as you can see, just a little piece I've got. And when I was starting out, it wasn't obvious to me. I was like, well, how do you get a bowl out of the log? I mean, do you slice it this way? Do you slice it this way? And there is some people that do bowls this way, which are the end grain bowl, but that's fairly rare. The problem with that method is you've got the pith in there, which I have circled on here, and the pith they always crack on me. So typically bowls are taken out of the log this way. So you would get a bowl from each side of this log. And to illustrate, of course, to do this with green bowls, you're going to need a chainsaw. And I highly recommend getting a ripping chain for your chainsaw. It's just a lot easier on the saw, and you'll cut much faster with a ripping chain. But the way I would approach this one is, like I say, I've got the pith marked, and you really want to avoid that pith. So what I would typically do on a log is, first I usually actually cut off the bark to a certain amount. So I would make a cut here, and then I would make a cut here. And that gets a flat side, which will help you if you're going to use a bandsaw to help round up your blank. That's always good to do. Then I'll actually make a cut here, and then another cut here. And this will just be waste. And that's done just to get rid of this pith. So here's your 2 bowl blanks. You would have one here, and then you would have another one here to get 2 bowls out of there. Now, sometimes if it's not a very large log, I might just make one cut down the middle and just split the pith apart. I'll do that if I'm going to turn those blanks pretty soon, because if you really let that pith sit there even for just a few days, I've always had cracks. So if you can turn that right away within a day or two, you can get away with just making one cut in the middle. But typically I do make 2 cuts and get rid of that pith. Okay, now we'll move on, and I'll show you a piece that I've taken and sliced. So here's a slice, as you can see, and this would be like that log. So here's 1/2. You see, I've on this one I've cut this face here to get it flat, and then I've cut away the pith on this piece. So as you can see now, I've drawn a circle in here, and typically I'll just use a compass and draw a circle, or you could use anything just to make you a good circle to line up the bowl where you want to cut out the blank. And then, as you can see, the bowl would be this way. Typically you do this way, where you have the bark is arced this way, so that's the arc of the bowl, and that's the typical way you can do it. And if you ever want to do like a live edge, you just reverse that, and if you've got a good piece of wood that has a nice bark on it that will stay on there, then you can turn the bowl this way. And then once you've got this circle here, you can either use your chainsaw and try to round it up the best you can with your chainsaw. But I typically use a bandsaw. And you can take this on the bandsaw and you can actually make a jig to turn it around the center. But when you make a flat, as I've done here at the bottom, it sets pretty level, so you can just pretty much freehand that, and it just has to be close. Like I say, you can even use a chainsaw and just get it fairly close and have a lot of little flats. And when you go on the lathe to rough it out, you can clean that right up. But that's how you take a bowl out of the log. It just adds the extra tools of a chainsaw and a bandsaw. But like I say, you don't absolutely need a bandsaw. And all the methods I talked about with a dry bowl will work the same with a green bowl. It's the same kind of methodology and the same sequence of events. But once you turn your green bowl, you typically want to take some anchor seal and coat that bowl completely. I coat the complete bowl, not just the end grain. And then you want to make the thickness of the bowl. If the diameter is 10 inches, you want to make the thickness of the bowl 1 inch. So it's like a 10% rule. So if you had a bowl that was a 15-inch bowl, you'd want to make the size of the bowl 1.5 inches. All right, everyone, I really hope this video has helped you out. It's definitely something I wish I'd had in the beginning. So I really appreciate you guys watching. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe.